Hi, you guys, and welcome back to the podcast.
We are the Carwells.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are, as you know, Airbnb interior designers and investors. Welcome back, everyone, to Catch Up with the Carwells. Thank you for joining us. Today we have Helen, who has a wedding venue / short-term rental situation out in upstate New York. And Emily and I are so excited to kind of dive into her business model, as we have had big interest in wedding venues as well. So Helen, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be a part of this. We actually had a chance to meet in Nashville, so I've been excited to catch up with you guys again.
Yeah. Wow. Nashville, we got to meet so many people in the space that we've socialized with online that just, I love when those online relationships become in real life relationships. Well, as always, we start every single episode with an Airbnb or an entrepreneurial horror story. And I know you mentioned you had one around a wedding. So let's get this episode kicked off with that first.
So our property is a former girls' summer camp. And so we have cabins and we also have an event space on the property. So we host weddings besides just short-term rental guests. So we had a wedding last year, and I'm also going to give brides a pro tip here. So the bride had hired her cousin to do the pictures. Lovely lady. I would recommend don't hire a family member because they want to be at the wedding as well. Like, they're socializing with their family and friends. Like, they know everybody. So it's just harder because they don't always necessarily have the same amount of time as maybe somebody who would be just doing the pictures for your wedding. So the photographer was an hour late for our, like, they were doing the first looks and all of that before the ceremony. So they were an hour late. So we're trying to rush everything. And one of the pictures that we were trying to get was the couple in this 1968 vintage yellow Bronco. So if you ever go on my social media page, you'll see who it is because that picture's all over the place. Well, she was trying to climb into the Bronco, and we're trying to rush because we had a shortened amount of time. And when she went to climb up, her boots, she was wearing like cowboy boots, went into the dress and it ripped her dress. So this is right before the ceremony. Like, we're talking like 10 minutes. So I told her, I'm like, don't worry about it. We're going to get it. So she gets the pictures. She comes back out of the car, and the rip was probably the size of like your forearm, like from elbow to wrist. Like, you can't, but luckily it was just the inside part of the dress, like what's that called? Like the crinoline, like that, that meshy part. So I ran and got scissors and I cut it. I cut it because the problem was where it ripped, it was hanging under the dress. So it was just this front part was like hanging. So we cut it, and luckily she was an amazing bride, and she's like, whatever, no one's gonna know, no one's gonna see. She was just fine with it, but my heart dropped. I was like, oh my gosh. But like I said, nobody saw it, nobody knew. She went on with the ceremony. It was fine. It ended up being a beautiful wedding, but I was terrified that the dress had been damaged, and it didn't. But just the rip on the inside. That was my like moment. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you do like the day of coordination as well? Yeah, I would.
Yeah, so we assisted.
I got like a drink spilled on my dress.
Yeah. So yeah, like it's one of those things, and it was right before the ceremony. Yeah. So we do also do the day of coordination and assist with that. I actually have now hired somebody that does it, and I'm kind of like an assistant and just kind of the managing part. That way, because I was the only one that day, I didn't have an assistant. So I was running everywhere to do that stuff. So we've since then hired an additional person to help us with that type of stuff, because we do quite a few events a year, and it's nice to just have a person that takes on that piece.
I cannot even fathom having a dress rip right before a ceremony. I mean, weddings you're spending an arm and a leg on, and you just like go into so in-depth detail on what that day is going to be like, and to have something happen like that 10 minutes before, I just can't even imagine like being in the mental space at that point to be like calm.
Yeah, and luckily she was, I have to say, I think because the style of venue we have is a very relaxed kind of venue, that our couples naturally are that way. So like, she's the best. I love her. I still talk to her all the time. and she was just okay with it. She was just excited to get married, and she wasn't worried at that point anymore with what was going on. Thank goodness. And she was fine with me like cutting it. She's like, "Yep, cut it. Let's go." Because she kept tripping on it, like her foot kept going in the hole. So it wasn't even like we could try to save it. If we safety pinned it, I think it would have just ripped more. So yeah, we just cut it, and move on.
Move on.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare scenario for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's incredible. I think that's the first time that we've had a wedding horror story on the podcast. So, but that comes with like an extra layer of stress on that day in particular.
And I think that there's always something that happens on wedding days. You know, there's always that one thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Mine was that my DJ just didn't show up day of my wedding.
Didn't show up at all?
Didn't show up
like
at all.
No messaging, anything? Like ghosted you and just didn't show up?
Yeah, ghosted us and didn't show up. We ended up calling him, and he said that he had the wrong dates, and so we were left like scrambling 10 minutes before the ceremony trying to find a replacement DJ, which we ended up finding a replacement DJ, and by the time the ceremony was over, he was like there and set up. So we had people who were able to react fast enough to like account for that, but it was just chaos 10 minutes before the ceremony.
Oh no, that's terrible. I'm sorry that happened to you, Sarah.
Thank you. It's part of it though, right? And I think Emily's nightmare scenario is she hired a photographer for her wedding, of course, and the photographer, I don't know if it was I think it was like a week after her wedding or so. The photographer's car got robbed, and one of the cameras that had all of like the groomsmen photos on it got stolen, and so they never got those photos.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I have a delay. I think so.
Yeah,
I think I have a delay, so this might come up. But it was actually a month after that they had gotten stolen. And it was all the second shooter photos. So like my daddy-daughter dance, there's like no photos of that. There's no photos of so many things because it got stolen.
Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry that happened to you, Emily.
But you're right. It's like every single wedding just has things that happen that you just have to like roll with the punches.
I eloped, so it's kind of funny that now I do weddings, but I didn't even have a big wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Emily and I, now looking back, both of us might have eloped as well. So I am so curious to dig into your business model a little bit. So for our listeners, will you give kind of an elevator pitch on your current business model and how you got into it?
Yeah, so we're basically two businesses in one. We have a former girls summer camp just outside of Saratoga Springs, New York. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Upstate, we're about 3 hours north of New York City. And we have 60 acres with multiple cabins. We have lodge, we have 3 pavilions. The 60 acres has 2 ceremony locations and ponds. When we purchased the property, it was, I don't want to say run down, but it had stopped being a girls' summer camp for about 10 years. And 2 ladies had owned it, and they just kind of spent time there. So what we did when we purchased it is we renovated all the buildings, and we added glamping tents. So what happens is you can rent either through an OTA, a cabin, you can rent the entire property, or you can have an event there. And so when you have an event, you are renting all of the buildings at once. So instead of having just a wedding day, you're having a wedding weekend. So they come on Friday, they do their rehearsals, the ceremony and all the fun stuff is on Saturday, and then they leave Sunday after breakfast. So we basically have 2 LLCs on the property, one for the short-term rentals and one for the event business. And the reason for that is the event side, you're dealing with things like alcohol, food being served, the vendors. So we separated the 2. That was something that was recommended that we do. So yeah, we basically have 2 businesses going on one property.
That is insane, for one. 2, we designed a wedding venue in New York that kind of functions a similar way, I think maybe 3 years ago. And that concept really floored me back then, and it's still flooring me now. One of my biggest questions around it is, how do you prioritize your calendar specifically? Like, do you dedicate every single weekend in the summer to weddings and you just don't put it on the OTAs for individual rentals, or how do you coordinate all of
Yeah,
that?
so I block out all of the weekends, and then the month prior, month and a half, I open them up because no one's really booking a wedding in a month. So they stay blocked until about a month and a half, and then I open them up. I do have it set up where my goal is to rent the whole property as opposed to the individual cabins. So it's listed as the whole property and then also individual spaces. I do get a lot of people that will rent multiple. Like they might have like this one group, the grandparents didn't want to sleep with all the kids and the grandkids. So they booked a cottage for themselves and then the rest of the family is sleeping in the lodge. So I get a lot of that where they'll rent multiple spots.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds, I mean, we have a big property in Cadillac and we've thought about hosting weddings at it. And I'm always so curious. I'm like, the weekends are our biggest profits, but I feel like those profits could be even bigger if we allowed a wedding venue. But I was curious, with the multiple LLC aspect of it and just, balancing that calendar on Airbnb because, again, you want a super full calendar, but you don't want your weekends to fill up with somebody who books like just a few cabins.
Yeah, you definitely would increase your profit, but there's also a lot of additional expenses. So, for example, you want to get your property if you're doing weddings on like the wedding wire or the knot. That's really expensive. You're talking about anywhere from $500 to $1,200 a month to list on the website. Yeah.
Seriously?
Yep. Yep.
Real? Why?
It's just everything that whenever you attach the word wedding, it doubles for whatever reason. So yeah, so I list it on the wedding wire and the knot, and I am not even one of the top people. I did like their base package, and I think it's like 500 something a month I'm paying right now. Yeah, for that. So
wow. Do they also take a percentage of the reservation
no,
like Airbnb and
no,
VRBO?
nope, it's just a flat rate. And the wedding wire and the knot are together. They're actually the same company. So the knot bought the wedding wire. So when you rent, like when you list on one space, you're doing it on both. So then you
That
also
makes sense.
have to have professional pictures. Like pictures are humongous. So you're going to want to hire photographers and you're going to do staged like photo shoots. Then you have to have the extra insurance and the separate LLC. So by the time you take those expenses, that's why your wedding is so expensive. That's why when you're renting a wedding venue, there's a lot to it. I have to also have a separate CRM. So in the short-term rental world, we call it a PMS system. In the wedding world, they call it CRM. So I have to have a separate system for that so that I can keep track of the couple because we get leads all week long of people who are inquiring about your wedding. So you want to be able to keep track of that. So there's a lot of additional expenses. Once you get that, just like with short-term rentals, once you get that automated and get that kind of set up, it's not so bad. I do make a lot more on if renting for a wedding. So right now it's $12,000 for the wedding weekend, but you have to take out.
And what would it be if they were just renting it not for a wedding weekend, just renting out the entire property to stay as like a family reunion?
Depending on the weekend, about $4,000.
Okay, so exponentially more profitable. I love that.
But you also have to take into consideration I've hired a wedding coordinator, so you're paying her.
Right.
So I'm still making more money, but it's I'm spending a little bit more as well. And you're also having like I can accommodate 200 people. So that's 200 people of parking, walking on your property, using your bathrooms. So there's going to be some extra wear and tear. So all of that is taken into consideration. I'm actually priced pretty low at $12,000 right now. Next year I'll be going up and I'll be close between 15 and 20,000 next year. So as you get going and as you start to create a name for yourself, then and you have more photo galleries and pictures, then you're able to increase your prices. So I'm pretty low for the area. I should be like 17, 18,000 right now.
How come you're keeping it lower and not raising that up to the 17 or 18,000 mark?
Because we're still fairly new. So we've only been a year in doing weddings and events. Last year was our first year. So I'd like to get more under my belt before I start raising the prices.
That makes a ton of sense. I think that people underestimate, like when they're calculating what they think a property or a business could make them in profit, they anticipate sometimes making that amount in year one. And I think that's a common mistake, right? It's like if you can hold off a year, not only are you learning along the way and you're not charging your guests as much, so they're most of the time more gracious with you when there are mistakes that happen. But you'll get it year 2 or year 3 when you have a reputation built up, when you have reviews built up, when you have your systems ironed out. Like, year 2 is really the time to start thinking about raising rates, not right out the gate.
Absolutely. And we're doing, so last year we had 12 events. This year we have, I think, 18 scheduled. So we have quite a few already in place. And we don't do just weddings. We open it up to family reunions, retirement parties. Last weekend it was a bachelorette party. They rented the whole space. The girls stayed on one side, the boys stayed on the other, and then they would meet at the pavilion and do dinners and different activities. So we open it up to different types of events, but having that pavilion really makes it easy for us because we're not renting a tent. We're not bringing those extra things in. So that makes it much easier. Our pavilion is 100 by 40, so it's a big space.
Right. So when you're hosting these other events like bachelorette parties or retirement parties or whatever else is coming into your space besides a wedding, you're charging them that $4,000 instead of the $12,000, correct?
Yeah, they're not getting the same because they're not. So whenever I have a large event, I also tack on wedding day insurance. So Sarah, if you decide to try out a wedding and you get a tent and let somebody get married in your property, I would have the couple they call it day of event insurance. And it covers you as well as the couple. And that's really in case, somebody had a drink and God forbid, like they got in an accident, it would cover. So we put that in for all of our weddings just because that's the kind of stuff that happens. People are drinking. It's just a different vibe. So we don't necessarily require that for a bachelorette party that's just staying on the property. So there's different expenses there that way. And I have extra staff that is on hand at a wedding because you know that the toilet is going to break. You know that the water is going to stop working at the sink. Like, those things are going to happen. So we have extra staff that's just there for parking the people, directing them. It's 60 acres. And for whatever reason, as soon as people enter the woods, they panic. So we have people all along the route to help guide them. So there's just extra staff. So I don't have that for the other events. It's not necessary. So I'm not going to charge them the same as a wedding.
Right. So when you're looking at the difference between operating a wedding weekend versus operating a weekend of a different event, and you're looking at the profitability difference that you're getting from a wedding versus in another event, are you of the mindset now that you've been in it for a year that you prefer wedding weekends because the profit difference is worth it even though it is more work? Or do you look forward to the non-wedding weekends where maybe there's less work and less profit, but it's less of a headache?
Yeah, I'm okay with the mix. I think if I were just doing weddings all the time, I think it would get kind of old. It allows me to be creative. I was super excited about this bachelorette party that we had. They were a great group. They did a lot of really fun things. I mean, they were doing tie-dye and they did an outdoor movie and they had a jam session. It was just a really fun vibe and I loved being around it. It was very stress-free. They were awesome. I told them, you guys should do this every single year. But I think what's nice about a wedding is, and this, you remember your wedding and you remember where your parents got married, where your grandparents got married. There's just something special about that place. And what's really nice is my couples from last year that got married, they're coming back to do their anniversary here. So there's just this kind of special bond that you have with them because you were a part of their day. And it's, I had for Mother's Day not so long ago, my couples last year, they wished me happy Mother's Day. It's just kind of a nice thing that, we're all part of this special moment. So that's pretty cool. You don't get that with anything else.
Yeah, I know. I would love to like be able to go back to where we got married and stay on the grounds if it was a situation like this. I mean, that would be like incredibly special, incredibly nostalgic. So I totally can see how you can get some repeat clientele very quickly by having it as a wedding venue
Yeah,
as
and
well.
that's the hard part. Weddings, like once you have a wedding, they don't necessarily come back. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not going to come back. You're hoping that they're not going to have a second wedding, because that means the first one, ended in divorce. But so that means you're always having to market, stay on top of it, and stay on top of current trends, because you're always trying to get new couples to come in. So that's the hard part. But I feel like short-term rentals are similar. You're always having to up your game. You're always having to make sure that you're, offering the newest amenities, staying on trend, having those professional pictures, updating them. So it's very similar, but I do feel you tend to get a few more as far as the repeat guests. Families that will stay at the same place every year, kind of thing.
Right. Another question I have as well is, from a marketing perspective, short-term rental hosts are really spoiled in the fact that Airbnb and VRBO do 99% of the marketing for us. And so we don't have to allocate a marketing budget to this business. Maybe in addition to social media would be the other thing that people would do. So for you, even though it's annoying to have to pay these fees on platforms like The Knot, does it have the same impact when it comes to marketing, or are you having to do any additional marketing outside of that locally or in the surrounding areas to draw in those wedding parties?
I do. The average wedding venue, you should be spending at least like $1,000 a month on your marketing. It's a much bigger ball game, and you can't just rely on the wedding wire and The Knot. You have to go to your local sources. So they're like local publications. Like we have here in Saratoga, we have Saratoga Bride. It's doing those different types of things. It's getting out there. There are a lot of wedding venues, so you're competing with people that do just weddings all the time. They don't do anything else. And so their marketing budget is going to be a lot larger than a place like mine. So that's the hard part. I've been fortunate in that my community of where I am is small. So I'm just outside of Saratoga, and it's a small community. And so they've really embraced us, and they're really happy that we've kept the property reminiscent of what it was. Like we've kept that nostalgic feel. So a lot of the community is letting people know, like, oh, have you gone? You got to go check out Brookledge. Go see what Helen's doing. So we've had a lot of that because we're newer, and there's a lot of people talking about it. So that's been great. But yeah, there isn't something like an OTA. I guess the wedding wire and The Knot would be your closest thing, but you get a lot of leads. Like I'll get maybe 7, 8 leads a week, and maybe one will schedule a tour with me if I'm lucky. So it's a little different. Where on Airbnb, like I get like 95% of them. You'll get those occasional that like inquire, but for the most part, if they're messaging me, they're going to book. So that's not the same. So there's a little bit of like disappointment, and you got to develop a tough skin for the wedding world. But once you're in it, also working with your vendors. So we have photographers that we work with, and caterers and the bakers and the florists, and so they also help spread the word, and that helps. Social media is huge stuff for the weddings. Huge. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's nice that you've had a couple of weddings, you've got like extra marketing materials because you've got their wedding photos to post if you want, I'm sure as well.
And that's something we have in our contract, and most photographers aren't okay with sending you the gallery. When they're done with it, they'll send it to you, and they usually send it to all the vendors because they'll take pictures of the flowers and they'll take pictures of the wedding cake. And so that's something that once you develop like your team, your vendors, you all tend to support one another.
Right. It creates this nice little economy that's has nice synergy, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it's definitely a different world. And I feel like the short-term rental world, and I'm not knocking my wedding people, I love them. The short-term rental world, I feel like, is a little more like welcoming. Like when we went to Nashville, everyone was like, what are you doing? Oh, that's so great. Did you try this? Like, it's a super welcoming community. The wedding world is a little different because it's like multiple businesses in one. You've got your photographers, your florists, and there's so much competition within the wedding world. So it's a little different of a vibe, but once you find your people, then it feels good. It's like when you find like your cleaning team and your property manager and your maintenance people. Like once you find those people, it makes life easier. And the wedding world is the same thing.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. That's incredible. I mean, we've looked at, before we started short-term rentals, we were exploring wedding venues in downtown Fort Worth, and there were, I think, 8 wedding venues in like a radius of 5 miles.
Yeah.
And it seemed extremely competitive, but it is a high dollar industry, right? It's like I got to pick the brains of a couple of the wedding venues that we were touring for ourselves at that point in time, and they're like, if you get one that's incredibly lucrative and you've got, you know, your calendar's booked up with weddings and people are prioritizing your venue over your competitors, like I can see why you would stick in that industry and not be solely focused on short-term rentals. So I think your business model is, one, incredibly interesting, but two, you know, you've got almost like a little bit of a fail safe as well. Like if you don't have weddings booked and you're not exclusively a venue, you've always got short-term rentals to fall back on.
Yeah.
Which, you know, nice to have in your back
Yes.
pocket.
And so that's nice because in the wintertime, I'm not doing any weddings in the pavilion. So I'm renting the cozy cottage, you know, come stay in the woods with the, you know, the Hallmark snowflakes. And so that's what we do during our slow time. But you're right, like 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge boom in the barn wedding venue kind of space. And a lot of those don't have lodging. They're these gorgeous barns in a field. So they rely solely on booking those weddings. And people, the new couples coming up, they're doing things differently than what it was like when I got married. They don't want just one 6-hour day. They want a full weekend. They want it kind of a lower fuss where it's just more of a relaxed, less stressful vibe. And they're actually looking to short-term rentals. So if you have a short-term rental that can accommodate a larger group, people are looking there, they're going to book it and they're going to get married there. And if you're not tapping into that, you're kind of missing out on a possible revenue opportunity.
Yeah. I'm definitely feeling that this year because, I mean, oh, Emily, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm talking over you, but you've got such a lag.
It's okay. Yeah, sorry. I've been trying to hold off. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. But I do have a question kind of around that. When you were looking for properties and like your buy box, were you looking at something that was like, I can have weddings here? Or did you just happen to find a property that was like, oh, I can be a short-term rental and I can happen to have weddings here? Or were you seeking out something that it could do both?
So you're going to laugh. So I was a teacher. I'd been a teacher for 17 years and I was tired of being a teacher. So I was trying to find anything else that I could do. And I was looking at different things. Like I was looking at maybe I'll be a realtor, just different things. And we had always loved this property. It's kind of it's a rare type of property to have in our area. Like 60 acres is Saratoga, you have like lots. Like it's not even half an acre. So to have 60 acres close to Saratoga, this is a pretty special thing. And have 60 acres where it's not like wetland, that you can use all 60 acres, that's also another big deal. And we had always loved it. I was looking to kind of get out of the hustle and bustle of like being a teacher. I wanted to slow down. I also wanted to have my son attend a smaller school. We were in the Saratoga School District. So when the property came for sale, we saw it and I was like, I would love to live in the woods in a cabin and just relax and have my son go to a smaller school. So that was the original plan. Then when we moved on to the site and I'm a big dreamer and I feel like both of you are as well. I feel like if you are kind of designing these amazing short-term rentals, we're all kind of dreamers. So I saw these cabins and I saw the pavilion and you know, I can't just live in the woods doing nothing. So I have to have a job. I've got to do something. And so that's how it's like, okay, well, we'll fix this cabin. Oh, we can add glamping tents. And so it just started snowballing. And that's kind of how it began. And once people saw what we were doing, they were inquiring about, can we have a wedding here? Can we do this type of thing? So it kind of happened by accident, but I also kind of forced it because I wanted to do something else. And I actually just had a field trip
Wow.
here. So one of the local schools wanted to come and they're learning. It was like a bunch of third graders. And when we were done with the field trip, I turned to so my friend Christine, she works here on the property with us. And when they left, she's like, I need a nap. And they were only here from like 10 to 1 and we were exhausted. I was like, this is why I need to be in the woods and I'm not teaching anymore. But yeah, so that's what it was. It started off as like I needed a change of life. And I
Right.
found this place and it's, things happen for a reason and I'm so excited. I mean, we've been here 2 years now and it's amazing what has happened in those 2 years. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's amazing
well,
how
so
you've
in
been able to build.
comparison to you, go ahead.
Oh, I was just
Poor
saying,
Emily with your
gonna
leg.
say
I
it's
feel
like
so bad
amazing.
for you.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But it's cool that you've been able to build operations to that level in just 2 years because like if it would be different if you were going into it planning on it being that because you kind of have like an idea of what to set up from the beginning, but the fact that you went into it thinking something completely different and you've built these operations in just 2 years is incredible, really.
Thank you. Thank you. And when we first moved on the property, so no one has ever lived here. It's always been a summer camp or some type of like vacation space. So when we bought it in the summer and we had to move in right away because my son was going to be going to middle school and I wanted him to start in his new school. Like I didn't want him to go to middle school and the new one and then change. But the problem was the only livable building was the nurse's office, which was 400 square feet, no water, no bathroom. It was just a room with a bed and a pellet stove. So we moved in, and it was when the housing market was going crazy. So we're like, okay, let's put our house in the market and we'll see if it sells. Well, of course it did because nothing was staying on the market. So when we first moved, it was more of just we need to make this livable. Like we need to make it so that a family can live here with their two humongous dogs. And that's what the first few months were. It because we were using the bathhouses. The property came with a bathhouse. So in the middle of the night, I'm walking down the trail to go brush my teeth, and at the time I was still teaching. I was still teaching until June of last year. So we would work nights and weekends on the property and do that. So it was hard. I look back on it now and I can't believe we did it, but it's been an amazing journey. And I keep pinching myself that we've done so much in such, like you said, Emily, like such a short amount of time. We basically were doing 5 properties at the same time. Yeah.
Right. Which is insane. So, I mean, if you were, looking for a better work-life balance from teaching and you were burnt out from teaching, now when you look at, your work-life balance with teaching versus a wedding venue, which seems like an insane operational task, do you feel like it's taking up less of your time in reality or maybe the same amount, but you're just more fulfilled by
Right now it's
this?
taking more time, but that I feel is going to change. And the reason it's taking more time is we're just finishing up the renovations. So once we take out the renovation piece and we're just focusing on the systems and operations, I think it'll be much better. And I had to do a mind shift because in the teaching world, your summers are off, but now the summers are my busy time. And so my winters will be the time that we take that time off. And we're planning our first vacation because we haven't taken a vacation in like 4 years. Because before that was COVID. So we weren't taking a vacation. And now we started this project. So we're talking about our first vacation this winter. And so I just have to change my thoughts. Like our summer now is our busy time and our winters are slower time. So I think if you ask me in November, I think it's going to be very different than it is right now. It's just a different shift. But I know a lot of teachers are looking to leave, and the short term rental world is where I'm seeing a lot of teachers are kind of diving into because we are nurturers and we are like that natural, like motherly, like we want to take care of people. So I do feel like it's a great transition.
Yes, I could go down a whole rabbit hole of how women in general are so well equipped to be hosts for short-term rentals or for wedding venues, right? I mean, there's there's so many investors who are coming from long-term rentals to short-term rentals. And then there's a lot of women who are coming from just vastly different industries stepping into investing in short-term rentals. And I feel like the women aren't speaking up enough, because I feel like, you know, there's a lot of guys in the space that are macho about the numbers and about the profits and about everything outside of hosting. But in the reality is that if you're investment focused only, then you are kind of getting pushed out of the space, because you've got so many women in the space that are so hospitality focused, and that's translating into more profit. Yeah. So I love seeing that shift for women who are burnt out from nursing or burnt out from teaching or want to spend more time with their kids or whatever their circumstance looks like. Short-term rentals and hospitality in general, kind of like what you're doing, seems to be such a nice solution for their problem.
Yeah, and I do feel that the short-term rental world is going to be changing. I don't feel like it's going to stay this way forever. And like you said, I think we're the heart. Like, we are the ones who are putting those cookies in there. We're the ones that are adding those decorative touches and making those special experiences. I'm not saying the guys don't do it, because I know there's some that do a wonderful job. But I do think you're right. Like, you're not hearing us so much talking about the numbers, more as the experiences. And I can talk about the numbers all day. Don't get me wrong. I know my numbers and I know what I need to do. But I know at the end of the day, the guests don't care about the numbers. They just want to have a great time. And if they have a great time and they are loving your space, they're going to come back. And that's what's important to me, at least. And I was the same way as a teacher. You know, like, I knew my grades, I knew how the kids were doing, but unless they felt special, they weren't going to be the best learners. It's the same thing.
Yes. Both my parents were teachers, and my mom had that same mentality around teaching as well. She's like, I could, you know, throw the textbook at them all day long, but if I didn't connect with them on a very human level, it made absolutely no impact. And that is so aligned with the short-term rental industry as well. So that we definitely have that.
Absolutely. And if a child doesn't feel like you care about them, they're not going to care about you and what you're saying. I guess it's the same way. If they don't feel like you care about their experience, they're going to check out and they're going to leave you that bad review because they didn't connect with you. It's the same type of thing. And that's why I think teachers are doing really well in this as they transition, because we are planners. We're very structured individuals. I mean, when we plan our day with students, we plan down to the minute. So I think it transitions well to this business. I think the one part they have to really pay attention to are those, like you said, the numbers, like what the guys are really good at. That's the part that I think is a little bit harder.
Yeah. And in reality, I mean, Emily and I talk about this all the time. We avoided learning how to really in-depth analyze deals for so long. And then once we learned it, we were like, this is it? Like, we were thinking it was going to be so much more complicated. And in reality, the things that maybe we were already slightly good at or had a natural knack for really are the most difficult parts. It's like dealing with a grumpy customer is way more emotionally difficult than learning how to do numbers once and then being able to apply that across the board. So I always say, you know, if you're a woman listening to this and you're intimidated because you're seeing these guys who seem to have the quadratic formula figured out for these properties, it is not that complicated. That you should absolutely plug in and just get over that.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
I have one more question for you, and Emily might have a wrap-up question as well as we kind of conclude this, but in the wedding space specifically, I think, at least, you know, in my friend group and when I socialize with people who are getting married, we're seeing this trend where people are starting to look at smaller ceremonies as a solution, because weddings get really expensive, right? And not everybody wants to have a 200-person wedding. Some people want to elope, and a lot of people want to have that weekend experience specifically, whether they're having a big venue or a small venue. And so in the Airbnbs that we have in Michigan, we're starting to see more. I mean, my properties outside of Orange Cadillac that host 16 people, my properties host 10 or less. And even in the 10 or less properties, we're starting to see, like this summer in one property, I have 3 10-person weddings. And they like asked if we were fine with them hosting it. They're not having anything catered. They're not having any additional people on site. And so for me and for people who have properties similar to mine, from your perspective, would you switch how you're charging that, even though they're not really functioning any different? Like, I'm not having to hire extra people to come on. Do you think it's worth charging them more because they are still hosting an event? Or do you think it should run just exactly like any other reservation because it's not requiring anything extra of us?
So I think since they're not bringing extra guests, so the term for that style wedding is called a micro wedding. So any wedding under 30 people, they call it a micro wedding. And then anything that's like just the people and like their like best man and maid of honor, like the bridal party, that will be an elopement. So usually like an elopement, you're thinking like under 10. So 10 to 30, that's micro. So what I would do is give them the space because they're not bringing extra guests. They're not having a caterer. So what I would do is I would upsell. I would create a package that you work with local vendors, and with those vendors, you get a percentage and you're bringing those vendors in. A photographer, they love these like micro weddings. They're not stressful. They get great content. It's usually very intimate. So find your vendors, create a package, create an opportunity to upsell, find a private chef. Private chefs love this type of thing that's going to come, and use that as a way to make your revenue. They don't feel like you at that point are upcharging them because it's a wedding. They feel like you are helping them make planning the wedding easier, and you're still getting a percentage of that.
That's brilliant. Okay, so typically vendors will split or give you a percentage of their profit if you recommend them and you're driving traffic their way. That makes
Or what you can do is if the photographer, so let's say the photographer is charging $500 and you have your florist that's going to charge $200 and your chef that's going to charge $500. Like I'm just throwing out random numbers here. So let's say you create a package. So that package is now $1,200. What you would then charge the couple is say, okay, I have this package. The package is $1,350. In that package, you're going to get this. So the couple is going to pay you and you pay the vendors. So that's one way you can do it. You can work with some vendors. Some of them will do that. Like they'll say, okay, I charge $500. I'm going to charge the couple $600. I'll give you the $100. So it depends on how you want to do it. I would create a package though that's like, if you're getting these inquiries, create that package, make it in like a pretty Canva kind of spreadsheet, show them what they have, put lots of pictures in there, send it to them with like a link, like a payment link, and then you're good to go.
That's incredible. I love that. Yeah, I didn't even think about upselling because I'm like, I don't feel like we should charge them extra for the space when it's requiring no extra time.
No, and I would just make sure, check with the alcohol and that everybody is staying there. That's the big one. So if you're having guests that, let's say you said 10 people at your venue, I call it venue, but your space, and they bring 15 people and 5 aren't going to be staying there, I would then make them get the venue insurance. And it's not expensive. It's anywhere from like $175 to $300. Like it's not a huge expense, but I would even put that, if you know that's something that they're going to be doing, I'd put it in the package. And all they have to do is, like I have a person that does all our insurance. So that person contacts the couple and says, here you go. This is your stuff. Just sign here and it's done. So it's $1 million policy that will cover you and it covers the couple. It's just to be safe. Beautiful. Yeah. And we've been, so Ruby, a friend of ours that I met at Nashville, her and I both kind of do this wedding world short-term rental thing. And so we started a podcast because we had a lot of people that were asking us these questions like, how do I do this? How do I take my property and increase that? And so actually it just went live May 23rd, and it's called Wed in Bed Podcast. And it's just focusing on that. So we help people, like our first episode, we have a friend of ours that we also met in Nashville. Nashville was great. So that we met there, and he has 3 cabins that are next to each other on 5 acres. And so he was telling me about his property and said, your space is perfect. It's in the Smoky Mountains. You could have the couple stay in one cabin, the family stay in one, the bridal party stay in another. And then you've got a perfect place for weddings. So he's like, you're right. So we talked about it and we've been kind of guiding him. But in the first episode, he talks about what he wants to do. And that's our goal, is to help people do this type of thing. because the couples are looking. They're booking your place and having the wedding and not telling you. They're doing it. So if you can find a way to upsell or find a way to offer these packages or to increase the profitability, you might as well do it, because this generation coming up, they're doing that. They're doing it a lot, and you just may not know.
Yeah. The people who booked ours for weddings, they didn't tell us it was for a wedding, but 2 out of the 3 weddings, there was one wedding party member that then got sent the Airbnb link, and they knew me, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we're hosting a 10-person wedding at your B&B." And I'm like, I have no opinion on it. I don't care that they are or care that they're not. But I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm sure that people are concerned that the cost would be different if it was a wedding. And so I think that you're totally right. I think that there are probably several Airbnb hosts out there that are having weddings thrown at their place, and they just have absolutely no clue.
But the thing is, if you know, then you can get access to the pictures, and then you can use those pictures in your social media. I actually have wedding pictures in my Airbnb listing. So they say, oh, we can have a wedding here. And I put it in there that we welcome you, because they're trying to do it on the sly, because most short-term rentals don't want that. And I'm like, nope, come, I'll help you. I'll plan it out. We'll figure it out together. I've got you. Like, we're working as a team. So that takes that pressure off of them not like having to keep this like undercover wedding at this short-term rental somewhere. So I would try to partner with them. And if you're offering the photographer, if you're helping them, that photographer is going to give you all those pictures. And so now you have all these professional pictures of your property that you got for free, and you can use them in all of your marketing stuff.
Beautiful. Well, Emily, do you have any final questions before we wrap this podcast up, since you've got a live?
I don't, but I do want to say thank you for coming on and talking about this, because Sarah and I are both extremely interested in this topic, and I know that we have people ask us questions like this all the time. So I think that this will be super, super helpful. But can you also plug everything of yours so that people can go and follow you and get tips right from the source?
Absolutely. And maybe we should have you on our podcast so we can kind of pick your brain on a property that you're thinking of. So yeah, our podcast is called Wed and Bed, and it's on social media. For the Instagram, it's Wed, the word and Bed podcast. And then if you want to follow me, it's Brookledge NY, and we had to put NY because otherwise you're going to be following horse transportation. So Brookledge NY is where you'll find me on Instagram. And that's where you'll see kind of our journey. Like, we've been very transparent in that we're still building the venue, but the couples are like, they're in it with us. They're just as excited. So you'll see kind of what we're doing. And, the glamping tents just went live. So that's been pretty exciting. So yeah, so Brookledge NY. And if you have questions, like I have people often that will ask me questions on Instagram, and I'm happy to answer them and help out. But yeah, you'll get a lot of knowledge on the podcast. We definitely are sharing all of our, like how to deal with the planning and your town and the state and the county and your neighbors and kind of all of those things as well.
Well, beautiful. Well, we appreciate the transparency that you're offering, because I agree. I think that there's this beautiful energy in the short-term rental space around offering, all of this free advice to make sure that other hosts are well equipped for this industry. But I agree, when we were looking into wedding venues, we were not getting that same amount of transparency. Yeah, so for our listeners, if you are curious in that industry, please check out their podcast. And Emily, did you want to plug us, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, we will tag all of your stuff below so that they can really easily find you. And then Sarah and I are at the Carwells on all social media platforms, and you can find us on our website, thecarwells.space.
Well, thank you, Helen, so much for joining us. This is definitely an episode that I've been looking forward to for a minute, just because we do have wedding venues coming this year, and this has been an industry that we've been super curious about. So we are incredibly inspired by what you are building. And hopefully along the way, maybe we'll have something similar. So we wish you the best of luck. I can't wait to see these glamping units and see how they perform this year. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you so much, ladies. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.